The data is absolutely crystal clear on two things. Number one is that the best situation for a home is with married mom and dad. And number two, that moms and dads parent differently. In fact, they don't really parent the same at all. As Ryan Anderson said, there's not parents, there's just moms and dads. And there's just mothering and fathering. That's what happens. And that's going to be a situation in which these children are intentionally robbed of that. And, obviously they're robbed of the biological mom and dad situation because of some tragedy in their lives. And so now we're going to rob them of the second thing that the statistics tell us, bring a better chance at long-term success.
One of the big news stories that came out this week that I wanted to get your take on is that Bethany Christian Services, this is one of the largest faith-based adoption and foster care agencies in the country, made an announcement this week that they are going to start placing children with same-sex couples. You and Shane talked about a really interesting question on this week's Q&A podcast, which I thought was really thoughtful and helpful. A really sweet woman, a listener, wrote in and said she's a single woman, that marriage just hadn't happened for her, but she really had a desire to care for children, and she was looking into adopting. But she knew that to bring a child into her family would be to bring a child into a fatherless situation, and she was thinking through whether that was okay and how to weigh her desire for that against the needs of the child or the best interests of the child. And I know that's not a perfect analogy to placing children with same-sex couples, but what did you think about this decision by Bethany?
It's disappointing on a number of levels for me. I mean, I get the impulse. I don't question the impulse being one of, look, we do so much important work for so many children in need. We don't want that to be jeopardized at all. But it's not clear that it's going to be jeopardized. I mean, the situation in Michigan was a state-level example of thinking that the science was settled, the history was won, the inevitability thesis, all these things we talk about that at the Colson Center in various ways, that the LGBT movement is unstoppable and that it's going to march through history, and anybody that doesn't get on board is going to be less than the dustbins. And that's just not actually what's necessarily happening. It can seem inevitable, that's for certain. But in Michigan, after Bethany made the decision, the Catholic Social Services decided not to and to go to court. And, the courts have been on the side of religious liberty, particularly when it comes to religious institutions, specifically charitable institutions like this, over and over and over again. We've got a different Supreme Court than even just 3 years ago, even when that decision was made in Michigan. The one that is going to make the decision more broadly. And I don't know what motivated this right now. I mean, was it a new administration? Was it, an early executive order in which President Biden kind of instructed, certain institutions to go ahead and, apply the Bostock decision more broadly than the justices actually identified or, mandated. I don't know if it was that. I don't know if it was the threat of the Equality Act. The Equality Act is not going to pass unless something happens to the filibuster. That's just the way that it is. And there's even some people on all sides now getting uncomfortable with that. So it's just strange. I mean, I think it's, we want to get rid of this distraction and move on with our lives. But the hard part about this, Maria, is that it leaves other organizations who can't cross these lines. And I'll say definitively, this is a non-negotiable. This is a creation ordinance. God created male and female. God created male and female for a larger purpose that serves the family, that serves the repopulation of the world, that has statistically proven to be the best situation for children over and over and over, and nothing else comes close. I mean, we've got research on the side of this. We certainly have scripture on the side of this. So for those who say this is a line we cannot cross, I'm on their side on this one. And when Bethany Christian Services or some group like this does make a decision like this, it makes everybody else more vulnerable, because the line is, well, who says you can't be a Christian and do this? Over there, they're a Christian and they do this. And it just makes it really, really difficult. And I don't know why. I don't understand the motivation behind it. It doesn't actually make sense. It was unnecessary.
At the same time, I do feel the emergency part of this. Like, it feels like a burning building type situation. I was at my weekly Bible study with several women that I'm really close with this week, and one of my friends is a foster mom, and she had a baby that she had gotten that day. The baby was 5 days old, and I sat and held her the whole night, and this baby is detoxing. She was exposed to fentanyl in the womb, and it was really intense. She's okay, but she had some tremors, and it was really devastating. And I couldn't help but think when this decision came out, and I recognize this is an emotional response, but man, if there's a home that this baby could go to as opposed to sitting in a room, let's do it, And I don't know how to work through that from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah, I think the thing is a couple ways to think about that particular point. One is that there's not a dearth of adoption agencies that will adopt to same-sex couples, right? They exist. So if Bethany steps out of this, it's kind of like the Jack Phillips situation. If Jack Phillips doesn't bake the cake, you can literally find 10 others that will in 20 minutes. I mean, that was certainly the case in Boston when the same sort of thing happened, forcing Catholic charitable services to adopt children to same-sex households. And the argument was made as a matter of accommodation, but that service was provided by plenty of other organizations that would do that, some even nonprofit. So, that would do it, financially subsidized. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, is there really, this long line of children that require same-sex couples in order to take care of them? In certain cities there are. In other cities there are not. It's not an emergency situation like, evacuating children out of, England and needing to find a home for them in Wales or something. It hasn't reached that level of epidemic in most cities around America. Many cities it has. I want to be really clear about that. But the drive behind this is the drive to what's called parenting rights. This is what's driving, for example, the legalization of commercial surrogacy. Because a relationship that is chosen, that's intentionally chosen, that's infertile, and everyone knows it, you have to have, workarounds. And that's what artificial reproductive technologies have become, for that particular population. I think it's quite legitimate to think that Bethany doesn't have that many same-sex couples coming asking for their services. They probably don't have a long line. And so from their perspective, it's probably like it's just not really that big of a deal. It actually maybe has never even happened. And maybe they think if we continue to say no, it's going to happen because we're going to be targeted. And all of that's probably true. But the opposite then is the case as well. Right now, you don't have anyone coming to you, but you just put your stamp of approval on a relationship and on a parenting relationship. That is not according to biblical clarity. I mean, it just isn't. And the other thing that I think it needs to be said is what we know from the data. Look, is a situation where there's a warm home and care, is that better than the sort of situation you described with this young newborn? Absolutely. But the case is being made also along the lines of there's no difference. That same-sex parents can love their children just as much as opposite-sex parents, as if love or strong affection is all they need. The problem is none of the data we have supports that. And we walked through this a couple of weeks ago on the Q&A segment, several weeks ago, actually. Because what the research tells us is, well, first of all, the research is muddy, right? Because it's hard to find a big enough sample group of same-sex parents. You have to factor out all kinds of, economic and political and all kinds of other situations in the middle of it. There's a whole lot at work when you're trying to compare these two sets of parents. But the other thing that's the bigger problem here is that what the data is clear on. The data is absolutely crystal clear on two things. Number one is that the best situation for a home is with married mom and dad. And number two, that moms and dads parent differently. In fact, they don't really parent the same at all. As Ryan Anderson said, there's not parents, there's just moms and dads. and there's just mothering and fathering. That's what happens. And that's going to be a situation in which these children are intentionally robbed of that. And, obviously they're robbed of the biological mom and dad situation because of some tragedy in their lives. And so now we're going to rob them of the second thing that the statistics tell us, bring a better chance at long-term success.
One of the things I did want to talk with you about, because I just have such a deep sense of unease about this, is this week there was a big hullabaloo over these deep fake videos of Tom Cruise that were going around TikTok. And so a deep fake is basically...
I think you have to stop for some of our audience and say, what is a deep fake video and what is TikTok?
Okay, so there's this thing called the internet, and it runs over cables, the information superhighway. And this is for John. This is for your generation.
This is for me, actually.
Just to help you understand what's going on here. Okay, so
but
a deep
TikTok's
fake.
a social media platform, and
Yes.
deep fake videos is literally where you can produce a video, and it looks like it actually happened in real life, but it didn't.
But it didn't. So to give you an example of this, there's an old sitcom. It's not that old, but it's called 30 Rock. And there was a joke in 30 Rock. It was about sort of like an SNL type show, and you got to follow the writers along on their lives. One of the jokes was they were part of NBC, and NBC owned all of the Seinfeld footage. So they were really struggling financially, so they decided to make more money for NBC. They were going to take all of the Seinfeld footage and manipulate it to put Jerry Seinfeld in all of their primetime shows. So, like, suddenly Jerry Seinfeld was on The Biggest Loser, and then he was on Survivor, and he was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and all that. And in this episode of 30 Rock, they don't tell Jerry Seinfeld about it. And then he shows up at 30 Rockefeller Center, and he's like, "Why is my daughter telling me that I was on The Biggest Loser last night?" And they all laugh about it. But so that is a very early iteration of deepfakes, where you take the technology that can make it look like. So in this case, there were a handful of deepfake videos that this really talented special effects guy from Belgium made it look like Tom Cruise was doing a magic trick or something, and golfing and telling a joke. That was the three.
But think about that for a second. I mean, we've talked about the deepfake videos a couple times on Breakpoint this week. That's really something, right? When you can look at a video and you share it widely and people are like, oh, that's Tom Cruise playing golf. But it's not. It actually never happened.
How do I know that that's you right now sitting there? What if you are
Exactly.
LeBron James getting your political...
I can guarantee you that I'm not. Although I had dreams at one point. But this is really stunning. I mean, the potential for, as Adam Schiff, who is not necessarily the political authority that I would listen to very often on almost anything, but he's right when he says the potential for harm is tremendous here. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, think about putting a video of Kim Jong-un together saying, "I've just launched nukes at South Korea," or think about think about what would happen of a video of like President Trump kind of calling some of his extremist far right supporters, to arms, or think about fake videos of brutality or beatings or war. I mean, this is an incredibly significant technology.
It's terrifying. One of the things that Adam Schiff did point out, I think he was testifying, this was a couple of years ago, testifying before Congress on this technology, was that even if you watch a video, especially if it's something violent or something that really impacts you emotionally, even if you watch it and you know it's not real, like later you're told that wasn't really Tom Cruise, the impression is still in your mind. And the way memory works is confusing and convoluted. And, 2 years go by, you don't remember that was fake. Like if somebody brought it up to you in conversation, you might remember, but you just have this general sense that Tom Cruise is like a bad guy, and you're not sure why you feel that way. I mean, now Tom Cruise is kind of a bad guy, but anyway, like it can leave impressions that can cause all sorts of social dangers, which lead to physical dangers. And I mean, can you think, this was my question for you. Cancellation. You could make a video. I could make a video of anybody I want saying the N-word, anything, that it can be weaponized in such an extreme way. Can you think of any positive use of this kind of technology?
I mean, other than to make, even more realistic animation or films, I know.
Oh, sure.
I mean, you just kind of think about it for artistic license. But, that's the thing about technology is technology, once it's out of the bag, it doesn't get back in. And that includes whether it's out of the bag for good reasons or bad reasons. The same technology that allows us to repair the physical appearance of people that have been devastatingly injured in an accident are the same ones that have driven, millions of teenage girls to eating disorders. It's the same technology, right? It's impossible to separate those things. And you can't. But you can change history. Going back to what you said about memory, I mean, everyone still thinks that Sarah Palin said that she could see Russia from her backyard. She never said it. She said something about Alaska being closer to Russia and for somehow that influenced her foreign policy. But you know who said that was, I think, Amy Poehler on Saturday Night Live or Tina Fey on Saturday Night Live. Yeah, playing that role. So but think about that potential and then multiply it in terms of kind of rewriting history.
We already have issues with rewriting history in like literature and the things we're teaching to our kids right now. I mean, the 1619 Project came under fire pretty quickly after it was released for mischaracterizing American history. That's just how we talk about it. Imagine if you could show videos or pictures of something that never happened and pretend it did.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that the dangerous side of these things have been ignored now. So putting warning labels or limitations on this would have to be backtracking. I mean, we have predatory pornography that goes out and targets minors minute by minute and has clearly led to disorders, deviant behavior, violence, and we can't get anybody to put a warning label, of any sort of real sense on that, certainly not to actually rein it in. So reining in technology is not something that we do. We're struggling to rein in something as dramatic and devastating as, for example, CRISPR, the ability to genetically to do genetic edits. Now, so this is an interesting story. So about this, probably 2 years ago when I first started to learn and look into this deepfake video, it came at the in the instruction of a NPR podcast, and I can't remember which one it was, but they were panicking about this technology. They were panicking primarily because of what they thought maybe Trump would use it for. Right. And I mean, that's really the way this whole podcast episode went. And this was a week after the very same podcast had talked about genetic editing technology called CRISPR, in which literally you can get in and change DNA, which then, becomes part of the human experience forever, right, until that line of people die out. And they were talking about a week before how exciting that medical technology was. And yeah, there's probably going to be some dangers, but don't worry. You can trust us scientists. And the tone of warning between the two things, one that can literally get in and edit life, and the other that can get in and edit, what maybe happened in life. The difference in their reaction was really telling. But it just kind of goes to show we're really reticent to hold back technology. And part of that on a worldview level is what we put our faith in. What do we think is the thing that's going to fix our problems? What's going to make life better? What's going to make the economy grow? You look at the values that drive our understanding of the good life, and there's not going to be a willingness. This is what every superhero movie is about. The villain gets a hold of a technology and just can't resist. Other than Heath Ledger's Batman, who just Joker character in Batman, who just wanted to blow everything up. All the other characters, it's irresistible, and there's a reason that moral lesson is part of every fairy tale, Aesop fable. The allure of power, the allure of control, of financial profit. It just isn't. It's just not something that we can resist as an individual or as a society.
And this has implications too, I think, John, for our self-perception. So I remember reading a story several years ago about there's an issue in China because this was when sort of all the filters were coming out on Instagram, where you can put up a filter on your phone and suddenly your skin looks flawless and you look thinner or whatever else. they were having this rash of young people showing up at plastic surgeons to literally make their, like, to change themselves to look more like they look in these filters. And it was becoming especially a problem for the state because in China, the Chinese Communist Party has all of these apparatuses to watch their people and monitor people. But people were starting to look more and more alike because these filters are so similar. That people are like mutilating their faces to look like the filters that they're using. And I think this technology has that sort of potential as well, where it is so important the way we perceive of ourselves and who we perceive of ourselves to be. Like, what are we? Are we what we look like? This is a question we ask in all areas of culture right now. Are we our sexual behaviors? Are we our desires? Are we, all that kind of stuff? And I could see a world in which this technology takes us to the next level of that, where not only can I do whatever I want, but I can do whatever I want and I can make it seem like I didn't do it, right? I can basically paint an entire public life for myself that isn't real. And that
maybe
has
a private life. It may be
Sure.
a private life. I mean, don't underestimate. That's the other thing about technology is we're really reticent to say no. Our initial intentions for it are not usually the end of how it's used. And we don't know how technology is combined with other technology. That's the other thing. I mean, the ability to, for example, create a nuclear weapon is not really helpful unless you've, figured out missile technology, right? And we can kind of go through all kinds of different lines on that. We've already seen, for example, that younger people are willing to forego real relationships for artificial relationships. We've already seen, for example, how almost all of our relationships are mediated through some form of technology, social media. We want them under our control. What if we can control the whole shebang? We know the loneliness epidemic in certain Asian countries, particularly Japan, is leading to, the growth of companion robots and sex robots and things like that. But what if you could create a whole virtual reality video and then you could share it in the same way we post our, perfectly happy lives, on Facebook, but it's not actually a real thing. You kind of see where this goes. I mean, this is you start going down this rabbit trail and you think, Lord have mercy. And we should, because the slippery slope predictions, although they're accused of being a logically fallacious way of thinking about cause and effect, it's just hard to argue against it when the slope
the more
is
they happen,
sloped.
right? And it keeps happening.
It keeps happening. I mean, it keeps happening. How will my whatever affect you? It does keep happening at a dramatic sort of level. And our inability to handle technology well and keep our humanness makes further invasive and deeper technology that much more threatening. But I also say this, it also takes us that much closer to the bottom. And what I mean by that is, we talk about the sexual degradation of culture and say, how much worse can it get? And it can get worse. Mm-hmm. But you know what? It's not good. It's not fun. It's not meaningful. It's actually hard, particularly on women and children. And that was the early opportunity for the early church to jump in and offer a better way, one that is hopeful and meaningful and upholds the dignity of women and children. This is, by the way, one of the things we're going to talk about this year at the Wilberforce Weekend event. We're talking all about humanness. You made exactly the right move when you connected this deep fake video technology to what it means to be human. Mm-hmm. The central question about our cultural witness today is anthropology. Who are we as human beings? How do we understand other people as human? Where does their value and dignity come from? What are the opportunities in front of us? And we're going to walk through that during the Wilberforce Weekend, both in a pre-conference where we're going to talk about the image of God, male and female, as well as